welcome to the University Church. For you guys haven't been here before. We're a Methodist church, but we also have like a nonprofit aspect. We run a community garden that serves families in need, and we also have an after-school program that we work with Reynolds Elementary School down the road, do some really cool stuff. So I worked here for a couple of years, mostly in the community garden, helping serve people, and we have like a nice little area where I was growing herbs and just kind of started playing with them and expanding my knowledge. And I was telling her that I got certified online as like a certified herbalist and went through classes and tests and the whole thing. So it takes about a year and a half, but it depends. You can kind of go at your own speed, which is really nice. But they do make you, like, you have to make certain tinctures and salves and things and send them in so that people can like actually look at them, which I actually really thought was so neat, because then they kind of know, like, okay, you know what you're doing at least a little bit, which is cool. Yeah, so that was neat. And I don't know, let's see.
How easy is it to grow herbs like at home?
It's so easy, honestly. Yeah, and I can even recommend a couple to start with that are like really simple. There's a couple we're going to talk about today that are really ones like I would recommend. You can even grow them in pots, like in your house, like in the windowsill, or if you're in an apartment or something. They're great to just kind of have and to play with. And I know in a lot of my other workshops I talk about using herbs like to cook with, and that's a really great way to start. Like, you know, you have certain herbs in your cabinet and just becoming familiar with those, and maybe growing something like rosemary in your windowsill and just learning how to use it, and then experimenting with the medicinal aspects as well can be so helpful. I'm trying to think. Rosemary is a great one to start with. Calendula, which we'll talk about today, and like lavender, those are great ones to start indoors. So we can kind of talk about that a little bit more. But also, just wanted to let you guys know that my experience, I have had health problems my entire life. I have a genetic immune deficiency. It's called common variable immunodeficiency disease, which means that my body doesn't have half of its immune system. So I'm lacking that, and so I do something called plasma infusion. So if you know anyone who donates blood or goes to donate plasma, I actually am on the receiving end of that. So I get that delivered to my house, and then I do the infusions to kind of keep my immune system boosted. And with that kind of comes a lot of side effects. So I was getting really bad headaches and some things with that. So instead of adding on like all the medications, I really tried to turn to herbs and natural medicine, and just kind of started playing with it, and realized that when I was out in the garden, it made me feel really good, and just learning all the different plants. So just slowly would experiment with, things like lavender essential oil for my headaches, or making teas for when my stomach hurt, and things like that. So that's kind of how it all got started, and then it just kind of speculated. All right, so today we're going to be talking about skin and skin ailments, and we're going to be making an herbal salve, and kind of talking about things that you can use topically to help heal different skin issues. But before we kind of get going in that direction, I just want to take a minute to do my big disclaimer that herbs, I think, are wonderful and they can be so helpful. But of course, if you have an emergency situation, or you have a really serious ailment, don't be afraid to go to the emergency room and to use Western medicine. I believe in kind of the combination of both. And then also, please be very, very careful if you are someone who takes medications and you want to start experimenting with herbs. That's fine, but they do have some interactions with medications, so don't just assume that because it's an herb and it grows outside that it's safe to use as much as you want whenever you want, because there are some. The big ones are if you're on like antidepressants, or if you're on immune suppressants. So things like if you have MS or an autoimmune disease and you're taking medication for that, you really want to be cautious before using a lot of these herbs. You will be safe. I mean, for what we're talking about today, using them on your skin is pretty much safe for everybody, and the herbs I'm talking about are very, very safe, even for pets and for kids. But the couple that we're going to talk about that you can take internally, you just want to be cautious if you're taking any medication. So just want to make sure everyone knows that before we kind of jump into things. So as far as herbal medicine goes, it's the idea that health is more than the absence of illness, and it's a person's overall well-being. So it's the emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical well-being, which can be a little bit different than our typical Western medicine, where you go to the doctor and you say, this hurts, and they say, okay, here's the medication for that specific thing, instead of looking at the body as a whole. So we really try, when we talk about herbs, even if you have an issue, like if you come in and you have eczema or some kind of skin issue, yes, there's a lot of topical things we can do, but there's probably some internal stuff going on too that you're going to want to take into account and kind of look at. So that's a big aspect of herbal medicine, is just really thinking about prevention instead of cure, and kind of looking at the body as a whole and treating the body that way too. And for the best results, herbs should always be used as part of a lifestyle change. So eating well, spending time outside in the sun, exercising, sleeping well, and practicing happiness. I wrote that on my thing. I think that all kind of goes together with your health and well-being. It can make a big difference. So I think on my little PowerPoint, I have a couple of slides. I just wanted to talk about the skin really fast, kind of break it down so that we have a better understanding as we talk about some of the herbs. So skin is part of the integumentary system, which is skin, hair, and nails. And it's the largest and heaviest organ of the body, and it's our largest detox organ. The skin has 3 layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. The hypodermis is also just like the fatty tissue. So the epidermis is the skin surface. So it's like what you can touch, and it's pretty much just like the protective layer over the other layers. The dermis is kind of where all of the good stuff is kept. So the dermis contains the connective tissue, the sweat glands, the hair follicles. It's where your skin produces like a lubricant, and also where the muscle is. So like when you get goosebumps, the muscle in your skin is kind of pulling your skin really tight. It's where the nerve endings are that monitor like your external environment. So like when you touch something that's very hot, that's where those nerve endings are, and also where the blood vessels are kept. And then the hypodermis, which is the very bottom, or the fatty tissue, is just for body insulation. That's what helps keep us cool and helps keep our body warm in the winter. And so, along with just keeping the body insulated, like I said, it also excretes waste, so it's a detox organ. And I think a lot of people overlook that. People talk about detoxing, they talk about the liver, they talk about the kidneys, but skin is such an important part. When we're sweating and things are coming out of our pores, that's so beneficial to us. And actually, I know in one of my herbal classes, we learned that the hair follicles and like the sweat glands actually are very similar to the liver in the way that they process fats and hormones. So they aren't just there. They aren't, just doing nothing and just holding your hair in place. They actually are processing hormones and helping the body detox, which I think is so cool. So you'll see when we're talking about some of these skin conditions, a lot of herbs that act as liver tonics are also very, very helpful for the skin. It's because those things go hand in hand and they behave very similarly. So just something to kind of keep in mind. So some common skin ailments that we'll talk about today, there are like acute infections, which means things like insect bites and pimples and burns and cuts. So things that just kind of happen that are small and just like an acute issue. And then there's chronic issues like eczema, psoriasis, acne, things that are kind of long lasting and a little bit trickier to treat. And herbs can be helpful for all of those skin conditions. So we're going to kind of talk about a variety, and I'll point out which herbs are great for the chronic and which ones are better for like acute situations. And I don't think there's anything else I want to say about skin. I guess, the other thing I just want to mention too is if you do have some skin issues, like let's say you do have eczema or psoriasis, or you tend to get rashes on your skin, one thing to really take into consideration is like what you're exposing your skin to. So it could be, you know, that you have a sensitivity to certain metals, or that you are allergic to certain laundry detergents or body soaps or body lotions. So that's always the first place to start kind of before you go to herbs, because if you're continuously putting this one thing on your body and that's causing a rash, you know, obviously we want to eliminate that. And then one thing I really wanted to mention too is that there's a lot of people I know just recently in the past couple of months that have been talking about, oh, you know, we're having such bad eczema or so many rashes. And one of the worst things is Tide laundry detergent. It's like number one on the list of allergic reactions for skin. So that's something to keep in mind if you have young children or friends that tend to break out. That is like the number one now that doctors are kind of trained to, saying, well, let's eliminate that one. So that's a really good place to kind of start when you're thinking about washing your clothes or even washing your towels, like when you get out of the shower or your sheets. You know, those are touching your body. You know, when you're sleeping, you're in there, you know, for a couple hours, and so that stuff is going into your skin. So definitely keep that in mind. Okay, so for those of you that aren't too familiar with herbs, I just want to kind of break it down. When we are talking about taking herbs internally, we're talking about making teas, we're talking about taking a tincture, which is herbs that are soaked usually in alcohol or glycerin. It's like a very condensed form. We're talking about taking maybe herbal supplements. So that's all internal. And then when we're talking about external, we're talking about salves, which is what we're going to be making today. We're talking about compresses, which like a compress would be like if you know, mix this with a little bit of hot water and kind of ground it up and just put it right on your skin. Other external things would be like herbal oils, ear drops would be considered as like an external. And then there's also like herbal baths or teas that you use externally as well. So if I say something, you know, when we're talking about an herb and you don't understand if it's internal or external, just let me know, or if you have any questions at all, just speak up and we'll kind of try to clarify. So the first three herbs that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through sort of quickly because they're not ones that I brought with me, but they're ones that I thought were worth mentioning. And the first three are our big internal ones. So the first one that we're talking about is red clover, and I put red clover on there because it's one that you guys are probably familiar with. You see it out, you know, when you're driving or walking. It's that little red bud clover that's just growing right on the ground, and those are actually very, very medicinal. They're particularly useful for eczema and psoriasis, so this would be one that's used for like a chronic skin ailment, and this would be an internal one. So this is one that's best taken as a tea, and the reason that is because it's very mineral rich. It's full of iron, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and manganese, and it's very high in protein, and it's incredibly safe. So it's safe for pets, it's safe for children, it's safe for pretty much everyone. The only thing that it can do is it is used as like a blood thinner. And so if you're about to go in to have surgery, you just want to make sure you stop using it as a tea at least a week before you go into surgery. But it is just like an incredibly nutrient-dense one. So it really kind of helps the body detox. So if you're dealing with very chronic skin issues, like I said, like eczema or psoriasis, this is a great one to turn to because it's so safe, it's very cheap, it's so affordable. You can literally go out in your yard if you don't use fertilizers, and you can harvest them during the spring and summer, or go to the health food store. You can get red clover tea, I mean, a huge bag for a couple of dollars. So it really can last a very long time. So I want to talk about that one because it's so reasonably priced and it's just an easy one. Trying to think if there's... And that one is actually really good too for lung infections, side note. So during the winter time, if you've got skin issues and you're feeling kind of congested, that's a great one to turn to. So it's pretty versatile to keep, in your medicine cabinet. So the second one I want to talk about is Oregon grape root. And that's a great detox herb. It's really, really wonderful for the liver. It acts as an antibacterial, antifungal, and a laxative. And there have been a lot of clinical studies recently that have shown success with psoriasis when using Oregon grape root. And so this is one that does not grow here. So this is one you would have to go to the health food store or order it online. You can use it as a tea or a tincture. But it's really, really great for the chronic issues, for psoriasis, for acne, for eczema. And you can just, I think really a tea is your best bet if you just do that once a day to really kind of help your body detox. And this one is a little bit pricier. So of the two, I think red clover is a great option. But if you're really in a situation where, your psoriasis is just unbearable, maybe doing both would be a great option for you. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure we threw that one in there because it's definitely in the top of the list for dealing with the chronic skin ailments. So then our third one for the internal use would be stinging nettle. And this one's kind of a scary one people get really nervous about because it's one in the garden that, you're going to want your gloves on if you're pulling it out or growing it because it really will sting you. They're very, very prickly. But nettle is actually an anti-inflammatory herb. And it's also an astringent, which means that it can kind of clean the pores and kind of help them detox and kind of tighten up. It can be taken internally for acne, eczema, and skin rashes. It's very mineral rich, similar to the red clover. And it's one that I would also recommend doing as a tea, but you can also purchase as a tincture. And this is one that you can grow here. You don't see it quite as often like down the side of the roads, but if you go to the park or something, there's usually some growing in the summertime, but you can very easily grow it in a pot or in your backyard if it's something that you're interested in. But it's just very, very beneficial for kind of helping the body detox and dealing with things like eczema and acne. All right, so now we're going to move on to some of the herbs that we're going to be working with today, the ones that we're using externally. So the first one we're going to talk about is chamomile. And I know maybe you've heard of chamomile before. It's great for like relaxing and for sleep. It's one that grows very well in this area. They're beautiful. They're very fragrant flowers. But they're also great for reducing inflammation and calming irritation. And so a lot of times people will use chamomile like at night if their stomach's hurting to go to sleep, but it can also be used as a tea and then put on topically. So it'll do the same thing. It'll reduce the inflammation of your skin and kind of calm, like if you're very itchy or you have a rash and you just can't sleep, it's great to just kind of put on there either in a salve, an oil, or as a tea. It can also be made as a compress. Here, we're going to pass it around. So here's some dried chamomile from our herbal garden. You can smell it and touch it and just pass it around, but it's great. You can even put it in like a little jar with some hot water and kind of mash it up, and you can put it right on your skin and wrap it up. So it's really a great one, I think, for kids. Like, if you have chicken pox or something really itchy, you can just kind of put it right on the spot, and it'll ease it within a couple of seconds.
So you said a tea, a compress, a tincture, a mousse.
And a salve, which, those are the good ones for chamomile. So our next herb we're going to talk about is rosemary. So I have some dried rosemary and some fresh, so feel free to kind of touch it and smell it. And this one's so fun. This is probably one you're familiar with, maybe in your cabinet to cook with. And it's used a lot as like an antimicrobial herb. So a lot of people think, like this is one you use internally or something, but actually rosemary is really, really great externally. This is another one that's super simple. If you have some in your cabinet that you cook with, you can just take some of the dried, kind of mush it up a little bit, and add some hot water and let it steep for a good, maybe 30 minutes to an hour. And then you can use that water to kind of maybe wash your face if it's acne you're dealing with, or wash whatever spot, wash whatever spot is really irritating you. There have been clinical studies that show a decrease in acne, especially with teenagers when they use rosemary as a face wash, which I think is really great because it's one that's very affordable, and it's a very, very powerful antimicrobial herb. I'm trying to think. You can also add At health food stores, they have like rosemary essential oil. So you can also add that to like your face wash or your moisturizer if that's an easier way for you to go. And it can be taken internally as well, obviously, because we cook with it. You can make it as a tea and drink it. But I think for what we're talking about in terms of skin ailments, using it externally as like a wash or something is really your best bet. So our next one of my favorites, it's Plantain. And this is one that you see everywhere around here. It grows through the cracks in the sidewalk and in the driveway. And if you have a yard, you are probably familiar with Plantain because you're always pulling it out. It just grows everywhere. So this one I pulled out of the ground this morning, just right in front by the sidewalk. And then this is some that I had dried out already. Sorry, that one's a little dirty still. And plantain is great. Typically you want to harvest it in the spring when the leaves are young. And you can see in the picture in the PowerPoint, some of them have like that little flower coming out. Ideally, you want to pick them when they don't have a flower. So in the spring or the summer or the fall, like so the one I have is nice because it hasn't flowered yet. So you kind of want the young leaves that are more medicinal. But if you're in a pinch and you can only find the ones that have already flowered, that's fine. It's still wonderful. It's just lost a little bit of its potency. And this is one that you use topically. And I love this one so much. This is one I tell most parents to just memorize, because if you're out at the park and you or your children get stung by a bee or you get bit by something, turn to plantain. Find it on the ground and mush it up. Maybe put some spit or some water in there and kind of get it into like a paste. And you just put it right on your bee sting or whatever it is, and it draws out. That's what it does. It draws out anything. So people have even used it when they've been bitten by poisonous snakes and things like that, and it will actually pull the venom out. It's very, very powerful. It can also be used for things like staph infections, allergic rashes, hives, burns. So it's really great too, because not only does it pull things out, it also soothes and moisturizes. So it kind of eases that pain and the stinging, especially for children. So my best recommendation for you is to just use it as a compress, or if you buy the dried herb or something online, you just want to kind of make sure you mash it up really good and just put it right on there, because it is so powerful. It's also edible, it's safe, so that's why I like it for kids too, because if you have a baby or something and they grab the compress and they eat it, they're just fine, it's all good, they're going to be safe. You can actually add it to your salads and stuff if you want to. It's full of vitamin C. It's a pretty cool one.
I'm curious as to what it tastes like.
What it tastes like? Yeah. It's a little bit bitter depending on how mature the plant is. So like if it's flowered, it's really bitter. But in the spring or in the fall, if you get one that hasn't flowered yet, it almost tastes like spinach to me. Like it's really not, maybe not quite as, it just doesn't have a lot of flavor. It just tastes like greens. So it's not too bad, but definitely would want to probably mix it with some other greens, not just eat it by itself. Yeah. So the next one we're going to talk about is yarrow. And yarrow is a beautiful herb. There's yellow yarrow and there's also white yarrow. I prefer the yellow because it's a little bit more durable. The white one has very fragile flowers. And in terms of skin and like healing skin, I like to think like, okay, I want a yarrow that's like strong and durable, because that's what we're trying to do when we're using it, is kind of healing the skin in that way. So these are dried because yarrow, the season's kind of over, so I couldn't pick any fresh for you. But it grows very well here. We planted some a couple years ago, like this big, and now it's like this huge bush, and you can just cut those all summer long. You cut them and dry them out. So it's pretty affordable. Even if you order it online, it's very affordable. And it's antibacterial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory. And this is the #1 go-to herb if you're dealing with like a deep wound. So if something's happened, you've cut yourself, or a kid falls down and they have like a very deep wound, you would want to go to this one first, because it heals, but it doesn't heal too fast. And we'll talk about that a little bit. There are some herbs that heal too fast for deep wounds, that they actually will produce skin and it's not healing. So yarrow is great because it kind of helps heal from the inside out, and that's what you need when you're dealing with something that's really deep. It also stops bleeding, so it's one that I love in the garden. If I nick myself, I will just go and grab one of those leaves or flowers and wrap it around where I'm bleeding on my finger. It'll stop immediately, which is so cool. But with that in mind, this is something you wouldn't want to use when you're pregnant, at least not internally, because it's the way that it affects the body in terms of clotting the blood. If that makes sense. So externally, this is great. You just crush up the leaves. Again, another one you'd want to make a compress out of, or a salve. But this is another one you could take internally as a tea. It's also used to help with lung issues, or if you're feeling sick during the wintertime, it'll kind of get you sweating and kind of pumping your body to heal a little bit faster. So it protects you kind of from bacteria. But in terms of skin condition, using it externally is just wonderful. And a little bit goes a long ways. All right, we're making our way through. We're almost there. So lavender, which is one of my favorites just because it's beautiful and it smells so nice. So we'll pass this around. I just picked this morning. It grows so well here. You could definitely do this in a pot at your apartment, or in the windowsill, or on your porch. Or I know a lot of people will even just go put it out by their mailbox. It's just wonderful. It attracts the bees. It smells nice. It grows all summer and through all the fall and even part of winter. It stays pretty good. It's commonly used in a lot of skin products because it's antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory. So a lot of times you'll see face washes now that have lavender in it, or body washes, and it's not just for the smell. It also has some benefits to the body. It's very helpful against acne, eczema, psoriasis, even burns, and it can help minimize scarring. So if you've had a big injury or surgery, you could use lavender to kind of help minimize the scar there. The essential oil, which I have here, which we'll use in our salve. If you've been to any of my workshops before, I always say be very cautious when using essential oils, but lavender is the safest one. It's very safe. You can use it directly on your skin if you need to. You can add it to products. You can kind of do whatever you want. So it's very, very safe. It's even safe for children. So that is one that I feel comfortable kind of recommending. And lavender is just a great addition. So if you're making an herbal tea for your skin, or a salve or something, it's a great one to kind of combine. So let's say you're making one with yarrow, throw a little bit of lavender in there. Or you're making one with, whatever it is, rosemary, throw a little bit of lavender. It's just a great one to kind of add on to some of your base herbs, if that makes sense. So then our last herb we're going to talk about, which I wrote on your PowerPoint, is the star of the show. This is Calendula, and this is what is the number one thing I would recommend. If you only go out and buy one herb today, Calendula is the herb to get. So this is what we'll be using in our salves. So here's dried calendula, and it's sort of the end of the season. I went and picked this morning, but usually they're really pretty in bloom, but it's been a little chilly, so at least you can look. And calendula is a type of marigold, so a lot of people use them in their gardens. They help actually repel certain bugs and even rabbits from eating in the garden, and then you can use the flowers. You just pick the heads right off and dry them out, and they can be used for everything. But calendula, the number one thing that it's used for is growth and healing of the epithelial tissue, which is your skin tissue. So this is one, when we were talking about the yarrow, and I said yarrow was great for deep wounds, this is great for surface wounds, and this is absolutely not a deep wound one because it actually produces the skin cells to grow so fast that if you have a very deep wound, it will not heal properly because the skin will grow back very quickly, and the deep wound just will not have the room to kind of breathe and heal appropriately. So this is one that's really great to help with surface wounds, with inflammation, boils, burns, bruises. It can even be used for muscle pain. And this one is so safe. I use calendula on my pets. I use it on my friends' kids. It's absolutely the safest of the skin herbs. And you can use it as a tea, a compress, an oil, a cream, a salve, which we'll be doing today. And, if you do decide to use it internally, it can be very helpful for things like measles or shingles. So if you know anyone that has an episode with those, which can be really miserable, drinking the calendula tea and using it externally can be absolutely a lifesaver in those circumstances. I'm trying to think. Calendula oil, so let's say we'll talk about the calendula oil, but let's say we filled up a jar with calendula and some olive oil, let it sit for a couple days. You can use that oil also for ear infections. So if a little kid, their ears really bothering them, you can take a drop or two and just put it right in there. It's incredibly soothing, and again, it acts as an antimicrobial, so it'll kill the infection, which is really wonderful. Does anyone have any questions about any of the herbs we talked about? Yeah.
Yes, I've made comfrey sick.
Comfrey,
And
yes.
It's not, you haven't mentioned it, so is there a particular reason it might be in?
That is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked that. So comfrey, I love comfrey. We have a ton of it that I grow in the herbal garden. It's wonderful. We use it a lot on some of our other plants, on a lot of our fruit trees and things like that. It's just so nutrient dense, and it grows like crazy here. The reason I really debated about including comfrey or not, there is a lot of back and forth in the herbal community right now about how safe comfrey is. It absolutely is wonderful in a salve. It can definitely help heal things very quickly. It can be very soothing. However, there's a very large number of people that have allergic reactions to comfrey. So I didn't put it on there just because right now I don't feel comfortable saying this is safe for children, or that this is safe for you if you haven't used it before. It's absolutely one that I think is so powerful, and I think maybe if I become a little bit more familiar with it and kind of myself use it some more, maybe it's something I would talk about and maybe teach as a salve, because I have also I've bought some that have just been wonderful, but just something to keep in mind that people do have pretty severe reactions to it. So that's why I decided to not include it today. But it is one, if you're interested, definitely look up, because it's a beautiful herb. It has a purple flower. I can show you some if you want afterwards. It grows like crazy out there. And again, it's full of minerals and vitamins and everything. So there's definitely some uses for it. It's just not one that I feel comfortable with quite yet, if that makes sense.
Hey,
Yeah, no problem.
Another good thing for ear infections is
Yes.
Garlic and golden seal.
Yes, golden seal is another one that I really debated about kind of adding on here. Garlic and golden seal can be great. They're both antimicrobial and very soothing.
I found golden seal tends to act sort of like a booster to things if you put with echinacea, that increases
Absolutely.
the potency.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, golden seal is another one, kind of like the lavender. Functions a little bit different, but golden seal is something you'd want to pair with another herb. And it can be used both internally and externally. You'll see it a lot now, at the stores. If you go to the herbal section for colds and flus, you'll see echinacea, and it'll say echinacea, zinc, and golden seal. Golden seal is kind of always the third one that's on a lot of things. So like you said, herbal ear drops and tinctures and things like that. So that's a pretty cool one to check into for the winter time. You guys have any more questions before we kind of move on to making some salves?
I was just curious about, because I was looking up about the comfrey and then
Yes.
the plantain.
The plantain, yeah.
And then they have chickweed, but I have no idea how to find chickweed.
Chickweed, sure. So chickweed does grow around here. It's not quite as crazy as the plantain and the red clover, but chickweed grows here. It's something that you can find if you walk around at the park, or something you can grow in the garden or in a pot, and it grows very well. It's another one that you can use externally. It's really, really great for soothing rashes and burns, and for using it with eczema. I debated about putting it on here. Just one that I feel like plantain and clover and things are equally as wonderful. But yeah, that's absolutely one that is on the list for skin ailments.
I think they're the ones that you've mentioned are more recognizable, because I'm going.
I think so too.
I
Honestly, yeah.
I couldn't chickpea. Okay, what is it? I even looked at the pictures, but I couldn't figure out what it was.
Sure, yeah. Well, if you want afterwards, we can go out and see if we can find some growing. It's sort of the end of the season, so it's hard to find now, but it is one you can find it. But definitely it's much easier, I think, to find the plantain and the red clover, which is kind of.
use it.
The chickweed is another one you could use just like the plantain, where you could make a compress. So you can kind of grind up the leaves, add some water, or make a tea out of it and use it topically. It's not quite as powerful as plantain in terms of pulling out, so like the poisons and the bee stings and things like that. But it is very soothing and kind of just helps, I guess, like ease inflammation when you have rashes and things like that.
Would you just use it externally, or do you use it also?
You could use it internally in a tea. It's not one that I would recommend using by itself internally. Like, it's kind of another one you'd want to pair maybe with something if you're using it internally. Like if you went to the store, you wouldn't find like a chickweed supplement. Like, it's not one that's just like, by itself. But externally, I think is probably more useful when it comes to chickweed.
And if we go out, can you show us the stinging nettle?
The stinging nettle, that's one thing. The reason I didn't bring it in here is because the stinging nettle is done for this season, and I just didn't have any dried, so I apologize. Yeah, but the stinging nettle, I'll have to find some for you guys at some point, or if we do one in the spring, I'll make sure that we have some, because it is so interesting, and you can find it at the parks during the spring and summertime, but let me tell you, that sucker it has that name for a reason, because you want to be very careful when you're harvesting it. But it has so many uses. So yeah, when I first started growing it, I was very apprehensive. But it's a pretty powerful herb.
We used to call it 7-day itch.
Yes, yeah, I've heard people call it that before, and that's absolutely true, because you will get little bumps, and it is just not always a fun one to use, fresh out of the garden. So definitely drying it out or cooking it or doing something else with it is the best way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody else before we move on? All right. So we're going to talk about salves. So first, I think I might have done these slides out of order. So first, if you have never used a salve before or don't know what it is, I just really fast kind of wanted to break it down for you. A salve is basically an ointment that combines herbs, oil, and beeswax. And you can make like a medicinal oil out of whatever herb you choose, and then you add the wax to create like a semi-solid ointment, and it holds all the healing properties then of the herbs. And it lasts for a long time. You can kind of carry it with you. So salves are pretty versatile. It's obviously an external remedy, and it can be used for general skin care. It can be used for massage, for cuticle care, for pain relief, first aid, wound care, scar and wrinkle reduction, acne, all sorts of things. So I think it's just a really great one to know how to do. I think it's pretty simple. It doesn't take too much time. So we'll kind of start walking through the steps. The things that you need to make a salve are your herb of choice. So today we're working with Calendula, and then I also put a little bit of the Yarrow and some lavender in the one that I have kind of prepared already for us to use. But basically all you would have to do is, let's say you bought some Calendula. Again, it's a really cheap herb, or it's something you can grow. You throw your flowers in there, and then all you would do is you would choose your oils. I like to do a mixture. I always do coconut mixed with olive oil, but you can choose whatever you want. You can use avocado oil or apricot oil or sunflower oil. There's so many different ones. Some of them do last longer than others. I do this mixture because they last for a very long time and they're very soothing for the skin. Just doing olive oil can be a little bit more affordable, and that is fine. They still will last a very long time. So just for the purpose of kind of showing you, we're going to just use olive oil because I didn't melt my coconut oil this morning for you. So you would just take the herbs that you want. You fill it about, pretty loosely, about 3/4 full in your glass jar. So open that up. And then you just cover them with your oil. And you want at least 2 inches over the dried flowers. I say fill it up all the way because you're still going to get all those medicinal properties in there. But you want to make sure that they're fully covered. So you just submerge them in your oil, and then, that's not what I did, but you cover it with the lid, and then there's a couple ways to go from here. So you can either, if you have a lot of time, you put it in your windowsill, you put it somewhere that's pretty sunny, and you just let it soak for a couple of weeks. Once a day you shake it, give it a little, make sure it's moving around, and that's like the easiest way to do it. But if you're in a rush and you don't want to wait, let's say you know that your skin's getting really dry, you're getting a rash, and you want this right away, then there's some other ways to do it. You can put like a lid loosely on this, and then you can put it in a pot with some water and turn it on low heat and just let the heat kind of simmer, and you want to keep it on for a couple hours. So you have to stay home and make sure that it's, kind of going for, I'd say, 3 to 5 hours. You can put this in a yogurt maker, which is how I did the one we're going to use today. I filled up the herbs and the oil in here, and then I just stuck it in a yogurt maker. You leave it in for 6 hours, 12. You can leave it in for a couple of days because it's such a low heat, and it just kind of slowly infuses the herbs into the oil. You can do it in the oven. Yes?
You do wrapping with a heat pad over it?
Yes, I've done it with the heat pad before. There's all sorts of ways to do it. You just want to make sure it's safe. So if you're using a heating pad, and just make sure you're either there or that you're comfortable leaving it on if you leave the house. So whatever way is most convenient for you, there's any way you do it. You just don't really want it to get over like 130 degrees. Like ideally, like 100 to 120 is your best bet. Just because you don't want the herbs to burn. So you don't want them to burn because we want to keep that pretty color to them and make sure that we're getting all the benefits out of them. So whatever way is easiest to you. I know some people take their old yogurt makers or double boilers and stuff to Goodwill, and so you can pick them up for a couple bucks there, and they're not great for making yogurt, but they're great for making the herbal oil. So that's kind of just kind of depends what you want to do. I love doing the solar infusion. It's my absolute favorite way because I think that it's more condensed and stronger, especially, even this time of year. As long as you have it in a sunny spot, or in the summertime, you can even set it outside, and I just think it's really cool. People will talk about how the sun is powerful and that it changes it and things, and I think no matter what, your salve is going to be pretty, or your oil is going to be pretty condensed and powerful, but it's always fun to kind of do it that way.
Do you put it tightly or not?
Yes, you want to put it tightly just because if it gets knocked over or something, you don't want oil everywhere. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know where my lid went for this guy, but yep, you'll want to put it on pretty tight. If you put it in a yogurt maker or something like that, maybe loosen it up a little bit just so it has some room to breathe. But if you're doing solar infusion, then yeah, put it on pretty tight. All right, let's see. Making sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so after you let this cook wherever you're cooking it, or sit on the windowsill, then what you're going to do is you're going to strain out the herbs. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do this. I think the easiest way is to just have a bowl and like a little strainer, and then I always use cheesecloth to make sure we get the extra stuff. You can buy cheesecloth at any of the health food stores. I think even Walmart carries it now. It's pretty reasonable. You get a couple yards of it for like $2 or $3, so a little lasts for a pretty long time.
I've even seen it at Dollar Tree.
Oh, you have? Oh my gosh. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, so see, you can get
It's
it.
not
for
always
cheap.
there, but I can see.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, if I can get this thing unfolded.
Yeah, the health food store sells it too. I just bought some.
Did you? Okay, yeah. There's seem to be popping up at a lot more places. Oh my gosh. Well, it is just not.
Experiencing technical.
I know. There we go. Okay. So see, it's very thin, but it'll still, kind of help us get some of those herbs out of there. So
Now,
this.
would it be available to what? wet that,
What's that?
to wet it,
Oh, to wet the cheesecloth?
yes, I mean, is that advisable?
I would say, that's a good question. I would honestly probably advise not to, just because we're working with oils. Anytime you're adding water into something like this, it kind of speeds up it going bad or it going
Oh,
rancid, if that makes sense. So,
Okay.
and I should have said in the very beginning too, when we were putting herbs in here, when you're making an oil, you almost always want to use dried herbs. Or if you have fresh herbs, you want to let them sit out for at least 12 hours, just so some of the water can evaporate from them. Because otherwise, if you're putting them in with the oil, it'll speed up, it'll expose the oil, it'll make it a little bit too wet in there, and it kind of speeds up it going rancid.
Okay.
So it'll still last and you'll be fine, you can still use it, but like let's say something like this will usually last a year, where if you use fresh herbs and it's wet, it might only last 3 months. So a little bit of a difference. Yeah. So then you take your jar, whatever it is that you've been using, and you just kind of dump it. So you can see I've got lavender coming out with the oil, and then all that good stuff's at the bottom. So you dump it out, and then you can see I've got all the herbs in there, and then you're just going to want to squeeze it. So again, this is a real messy process, but it doesn't honestly take too long. Like it's pretty fast. You just want to squeeze because we want to get all that good stuff out of those herbs, get all the really condensed oil that's around them. And you don't have to use a strainer. Some people will just use cheesecloth. You can do this over a jar, over whatever you have that's available. I just like these things because they're cheap and they're always in my kitchen. Alright, so you get as much as you can. And I have been soaking, so the stuff that we're using today, I solar infused for about 3 weeks, and then I did it in the yogurt maker for a couple days because I wanted to make sure you guys were going to go home with a really condensed, product. So again, it's Yarrow, Calendula, and Lavender we've got in there right now. And then it's a combination of coconut and olive oil. Alright. So. So now you've got your herbal oil, and in the one handout that has the picture of the calendula on it, I have this all, the first page is about calendula, thank you, and the second page is about making the herbal oil. So let's say you are tired or you don't want to make the salve or whatever when you're at home, you can just use the herbal oil. You can use, this oil is very powerful, it has a lot of medicinal properties to it, so you can use this topically for different things. You can store it in a jar, you can put it in the fridge, you can keep it in your cabinet, and it will last for about 6 months to a year. So it's very useful, and I think I wrote on there a couple things you can even use it with. But for our purpose, we're going to kind of move into the kitchen and add beeswax and turn it into a salve because I think it extends the life. I think it's a lot easier to use. It's something you can keep in your purse, in your car, kind of carried around with you, so it's a little bit more versatile. But the oil is very powerful, so you can use it by itself if need be. So, I think we can all fit in the kitchen. So we're going to move on into the kitchen and talk about how to get this into a salve. So you have an idea. When you're making salves and you're using beeswax is super flammable. So that's why we always recommend using a double boiler. So this is one that, is like made for this, like fits beautifully inside of it. The other ones I got from Goodwill, literally like, oh yeah, that fits inside, that looks good. So you can just makeshift anything. As long as you have a small pot and a larger pot to kind of put it in. The larger pot is where you'll kind of fill it with some water, so that will be boiling, and then the internal pot is where you'll put the oil with the beeswax. That way if anything spills over or something, we aren't creating a fire, especially with using the gas stove. So, so you take your internal pot And you've got your oil over there. And you just kind of fill it up. You can fill it up all the way. I'm just doing 2 so that it goes a little bit faster for us.
Don't still have some little specks in it, right?
It does, yes. And you can,
It's not good.
it's not bad. You can use, double up your cheesecloth or do this again, if you're very particular and you prefer not to. I always say, I like to have them in there because they're still adding medicinal, they're still contributing to the salve. And I say the same thing in terms of beeswax too. So like this beeswax is right out of our hives in the garden. And so there's still honey and pollen and all sorts of stuff in here. And I love that because all of those things are medicinal. They just add to the quality of the salve. It does change the texture a little bit. So some people, you can make a salve with processed beeswax. So this has lavender on top, but see how it's very smooth looking, there's no bumps and stuff in it. And then this one is made with the beeswax here, so there's pollen and a little bit of gunk in there. Sometimes it freaks people out, but actually that stuff is very medicinal. It's wonderful for your skin. So I always like to include it when I can, unless I have someone that specifically requests, we don't want any of that stuff in there, they don't like it touching their skin, that's fine. But for our purpose, we're just gonna use our high quality stuff so that you guys are going home with the most medicinal things that we can. So we are just gonna scoop out. And there are measurements that people follow. I wrote it out in your handout. A lot of people will do 2 tablespoons or 1/8 cup to every cup of oil. I just kind of wing it. But you can basically, the more wax you add, the more solid it'll be. So let's say it's summertime and this is something you're going to keep in your car. You're going to want to add more wax because you don't want it to melt and kind of get everywhere in your car. If it's something you're keeping just in the house or whatever, then you don't have to add as much. That's fine. So it just kind of depends what you're looking for. But I just kind of add until I feel like that's good. And we will do something I'll show you. It's called a spoon test. And you can kind of see how hard it'll be once it gets going. Perfect. And again, you can buy beeswax in any way. We have some pellets. We'll probably add a couple of those just to make it a little bit
Where did you get the pellets?
The pellets you can order online. On my herbal resources sheet, I have mountain rose herbs and I think maybe the bulk herb store. Both those are great. They all use local beekeepers and they treat their bees very well. So you know that it's a good resource. And they sell it in pellet form. They sell it in little blocks like we saw on the table. I have them in little ice cube blocks, or you can even get it on process, which is really great.
Is about 1 to 10.
It's about 1 to 8. Yeah, 1 to 8, 1 to 10. It just kind of depends what we want. Alright, so obviously with this one, since I picked these up at Goodwill, they don't fit perfectly like these ones. You just want to be careful that the water doesn't boil over into our salve, which is getting pretty close to doing right now. But it doesn't look too bad. Alright, there we go. So really this is the longest part, especially if you do a solar infusion. It's just kind of waiting for the beeswax to melt. And occasionally it's good to kind of give it a stir. It does, it takes a little bit of time to get it going. and you'll see as it starts to melt, we'll start, like if you dip the spoon in there, it'll harden. It's not quite there yet, but you'll start to see, and then that's kind of when you get the idea, like, okay, yeah, like this is gonna be enough.
Yeah, it hardens pretty quickly at these ones.
It sure
And I
does.
made it last night. I turned for like 5 minutes and the whole pot was just solidified.
Yes, and that's something I think I wrote on your handout too, is like if you do decide to make this at home, one thing you're gonna wanna be kind of aware of is that when you pour them out
Don't
into your
turn it back.
containers,
Just pour
you're
it
gonna
on
wanna
pour it.
clean out the
While
pot
it's hot.
as quickly as possible, and not something you're gonna wanna dump down the drain. It's something that you're gonna wanna take a towel or a paper towel and you kind of wipe it, throw it in the trash or the compost or whatever you use, because yeah, the drain, it'll harden in there, it'll clog you up, or if you let it sit in your pot, it just is a lot harder to kind of scoop out of there. So obviously get as much as you can with a spatula into your containers, but the best way to clean is definitely just to kind of wipe it out with a towel or paper towel.
Yeah, I recommend like heating it up kind of a little bit, letting it get back solidified, and
yeah.
then wiping it
Yeah,
out.
absolutely. Yeah, you want it. That's definitely the easiest way. Trying to think, does anybody have any questions or anything they're curious about while we're waiting for it to melt? Are we all doing
What
okay?
exactly is the stuff that we're making today good for?
Sure. So the salve we're making today, the Calendula, Yarrow, and Lavender is awesome. It's wonderful for burns, for cuts, for like scars. You can use it. It's probably the most versatile, I'd say, of the salves. You can even use it for muscle aches. People will use it for, because both Calendula and Yarrow kind of have like a soothing and like deeper healing, like a little bit of heat to them. This is very safe for babies, for animals. This is the one that I use. My dog has really sensitive paws, so I put it on her paws a lot during the summertime when there's a lot of like fertilizers out and she's real itchy. Trying to think. This one, because it has yarrow in it, is great. Like it can stop bleeding. It'll soothe things like chicken pox, rashes. You can use it on eczema. Pretty much anything. It's one of the most versatile, which is why I chose it for today.
Now you talked about you use olive oil and coconut oil,
Yes.
and you suggested some of the other ones. Are there any that you really don't prefer because they go rancid pretty quick, or?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. So if you use, let's say like avocado oil or almond oil, those ones are great. They're very soothing, but you have about a 2-month window. Like it'll go rancid pretty quickly. You can mix them with something else. So let's say you do an olive oil and apricot oil or something. That's fine. It'll last. It kind of stabilizes it. It'll last a little bit longer. But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. And there are lists. If you Google it online, there are oils I've never even heard of where they say like, oh, this one will only last this long. I know one thing I've heard more recently is people doing them with like lard and tallow, and that is safe. Like you can do it. It definitely has a scent to it. Something to keep in mind. But if you use certain herbs or essential oils, it's absolutely soothing. I have used tallow on my skin before. I've never used it in a salve, but you hear that kind of more and more. So there are all sorts of options.
If you refrigerate it, even if it's olive oil, will it last longer?
So refrigeration, it can keep it lasting longer. It will make it very solid, which isn't bad depending on what you're using it for. But yeah, you can absolutely refrigerate it, and it should extend the life of it probably by a couple months. Yeah, that's definitely a good option. All right, so see, we're starting to get it broken up. You can see the pollen in there and a couple of our remnants of some of our herbs kind of starting to melt. I am going to throw in some of these pellets just so that it solidifies fast for us today, since we a little bit of a time crunch.
I'd also recommend too, like with coconut oil, only using like the unrefined cold press.
Absolutely.
And you can buy coconut oil in large amounts from like Costco. But you can get 84 ounces for like $17. It'll last you a while, unless you like to make a lot of stuff like I do. But usually, if it's just you making stuff, it'll last you a while.
Absolutely. Yep, that's where I typically buy my olive oil. Organic, and they have organic coconut oil there. It's very reasonably priced. They even have big things of avocado oil, all sorts of fancy oils you can get for like a really, reasonable price if you're making like, decent qualities, you're making them for friends and family or something like that. But yeah, definitely get the best quality coconut oil you can, and olive oil too. There's been a lot of controversy about olive oil being mixed with different oils and not being true olive oil, and so a good test, if you buy olive oil, is if you stick it in the fridge, if after 24 hours it starts to solidify, you got good olive oil. So that's always a good test to do. So yeah, so far the Costco olive oil has been really great, and there's a couple brands at like Kroger's and stuff that are wonderful too. Trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to tell you while we wait.
So if it doesn't solidify or start to solidify in 24 hours, it's not good?
It's probably not good. Yeah, it's something, honestly, you could use it topically, but that is definitely not one that I would consume. If it doesn't solidify, it's not one that I would ever want to cook with or eat, because, I don't know, there's all sorts of information out there, so you never know. But from what I've read, it usually means, that it's mixed with something else. It could be canola oil or something that's just not quite as beneficial as olive oil. Alright, we're getting there. Another thing I recommend too is when you do this, you can store this in whatever way you want, mason jars, little glass jars, whatever is convenient for you. But I always recommend labeling, just so that you don't forget, like, okay, like what's in this and what, when did I make this, just so you know if it's still good, you find it down the road or something, that way,
Do you
don't
have to worry
forget.
about sterilizing it, the jars?
You don't. Nope, not for this. You don't have to worry about that. I mean, I always wash mine out pretty good, but no, for something that's topical like this with the calendula and yarrow in it, you definitely don't have to sterilize. So you can usually tell, like, on your spoon or whatever you're using, or like even when I touch my finger, it starts to, like, while it's dripping down, it starts to solidify, almost like if you touch a candle wax or paraffin wax or something like that. And so that's what we're going for. We just want it, to be pretty good. So this one can get a little more.
Is there other waxes you can use, or is it best? I know it's best to use the.
Sure, beeswax is your best bet. There is a wax that comes from some type of palm tree in Brazil that you can order. It's a lot more expensive, but if you have an allergy to like bee pollen or beeswax, that's absolutely an option. It's something that I have never used, but I do know that you can use it. And I can get the name for it if you want, but I would have to look it up.
That's okay, because I was wondering,
Yeah.
could you use paraffin?
I've heard of people using it. I don't recommend it because typically paraffin is made with petroleum products. So when we're using herbs like this, we're putting so much time and effort into making such a wonderful, like, healthy product. So using beeswax, I think, is like the most natural way to go. But there are people, out there that will use paraffin, but I don't recommend it personally.
I don't want paraffin with petroleum on my skin.
Right, yeah.
It will irritate it.
Right, petroleum, and petroleum does, it has some effects too. So like when we were talking about the skin, and I was saying how the hair follicles actually act to like detox hormones. So paraffin, which comes from petroleum, actually carries a lot of estrogen, and so then you're putting that on your skin, and that can really affect your hormones, especially for women, can be a big issue, and for men too, who are being exposed to estrogen on so many levels.
Right.
But it can really hinder your skin's ability to detox and to regulate those hormones. So paraffin is something that I really try, to make sure you're looking for, even in your body care products. A lot of times there are different things in your lotions and stuff that might not say paraffin, but they are, they could be related to petroleum products in some way. And so really trying to cut back on that is your best bet, because it can just throw your whole body out of whack.
Shea butter is a very good alternative. It even makes your
Yep.
skin soft.
Yep, shea butter is great. That's a wonderful one. All right, I think we're doing pretty good.
I notice you're using metal spoons. I
I-
was always
I know.
using wooden spoons.
I almost always use wooden spoons. I didn't bring my spoon with me today. I try really hard to use wooden, or if I have to, like something soft, because metal on metal, you can get pieces of metal in your salad or something, and even though they're very small and externally they might not hurt you, using wood is usually the safest. And even with some of the herbs, they can react even sometimes with the metals, and so yeah, definitely using wooden is the way to go. I'm going to sneak behind you if I can get a lavender down here. Alright, so we're going to add a little bit of lavender oil to ours, since it's something that's very soothing. I know we have some fresh or some dried lavender in there already, but I think it just adds a little extra element, and it's something that's pretty safe to use. It smells pretty good now. Alright, so I'm going to come over that way. We'll make sure we'll wipe them off for everybody. So I don't know if you guys can see at the bottom, there's all sorts of stuff in there. So that's a lot of the bee pollen and some of the honey and all sorts of herbs and stuff that float at the bottom. And that's not bad. Some people really like having it. I try not to get too much in there, but if you do get, bumps and stuff in your oil, don't be too surprised.